welcome to DRG's first podcast episode. Thank you all for tuning in. And our topic for this episode is urgency as it relates to nonprofit culture and also as it relates to the hiring experience. And joining us today are three experts at DRG who represent different generations and age groups. So the reason why we felt like it would be important to include a diversity of perspectives here is because this is something that has come up a lot, especially as it relates to nonprofit culture and how nonprofit organizations can navigate having an intergenerational workforce. And the reality is our age groups greatly influence our perspectives on things. And so we thought it would be important to have some different perspectives here.
I'm Dave. I'm an associate on the research and outreach team, and I think I'll be considered Gen Z.
I'm Sterling Nelson. I'm a talent consultant. I am kind of right on the cusp between Gen Z and millennial, but I identify mostly as a millennial.
Omar Lopez here, senior talent consultant at DRG. I'm here representing the elder millennials hard, and with the heart of a boomer in some ways, as we will get to.
And I'm Yasmine Coccoli, talent consultant here at DRG. I'm also a cusper. I identify as a zillennial. I'm actually born the very last year of the millennial generation. So there are definitely things I can relate to on both ends. Okay, so why don't we just dive right in? So how do you differentiate between a sense of urgency that is driven by a need to meet deliverables, expectations set out by funders, versus a culture of urgency that can be detrimental to staff's well-being?
There's like a really important balance that has to be had, just like most things in life. If you push the urgency culture too hard, then you're just going to burn out employees. And ultimately, it's going to lead to a lower quality of work across the board just because people can't dedicate enough time to meeting those high standards. But on the other hand, if things are too lax, then nothing's going to get done, and then you might piss some people off. And I feel like kind of the best counter to urgency culture is to just remain empathetic at the end of the day while still maintaining high standards. So like if you're looking at it from the leadership level, I think it also requires a lot of trust in your employees. Just trust that they're working on to the best of their ability to deliver high quality work. Trust that they're managing their time effectively. And then if something happens to prevent a deliverable or something from being met on time, just trust that they're going to be able to pick themselves up and get the work done eventually. I think for me specifically, what I've done to maintain a high quality of work while not getting burnt out is to be kind of very deliberate in setting priorities for things. So if, for example, in our case, if there's a search that's in dire need of more candidates, for example, I try to make sure to block out time to do more research in the next day or two, while putting other searches that may be in a better place on the back burner. And so just knowing what's important to accomplish by what time is kind of the key to balancing the urgency, I think.
There's been this push to have more work-life balance, to not be burnt out, to not be working from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Like the day starts at 9 a.m. and it ends at 5 p.m. I feel like that's very much the wave of the newer generations versus boomers. And it is very much like, output, output, output. And I kind of feel like that wasn't really a conversation, like staff well-being, mental health. That wasn't really as much of a conversation, back then as it is now.
As the old head in the group, I'm here to represent the team urgency is a good thing. And here's what I would say. I have experienced both the negatives of urgency that Dave articulated, but also a lot of the benefits. And from my experience, as an old head, I'm here to push for why an urgency culture is good. You ready for this? Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. We came from a world where everybody went into an office every day to work and interacted with each other mostly in person. Even though there was email, and email was a huge part of how people communicated, it was also very typical to tap people on the shoulder and go out for a chat, to be able to do different things like that. Those kinds of interactions, even for offices that are now in person, hybrid, or fully in person, because the nature of work is so electronic, people are used to communicating electronically, and it's easier to give people deadlines or have an expectation for a response that is immediate.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is that what we mean by toxicity around culture often is around toxicity around specific aspects of workplace culture. So, if, for example, there's an expectation that an email in my inbox needs to be responded to within an hour, that's bad. That's not good, because I need to be able to be in a meeting and not also be looking at my email. If the expectation is that if someone sends me a Teams message or a text message or a Slack message, that I'm responding immediately, then that's problematic. That's where urgency becomes really bad. Where I have seen urgency be good, though, is an aspect of what's known as Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law is work adapts to the amount of time given to it.
That is so true, Omar. And I'll be honest, I'm a little biased. I feel like here's where my Gen Z perspective really comes out, because I never even thought of it like that. But I do feel like when you have a lot of time to get things done, it's almost counterproductive, because you're like, well, I have 8 weeks to build a pool. Next thing you know, wait, I have 2 weeks to build a pool and we only have 2 candidates. So I think that's a great point as far as like how urgency can be effective.
Yeah, I think so too. I think urgency is a really interesting concept that shows up in nonprofit organizations specifically. So before I joined DRG and became a talent consultant, I worked in youth development for a youth development organization. And what I found with urgency was that it often led us to really just putting out fires instead of actually being thoughtful around coming up with more sustainable solutions. And I think nonprofits are almost uniquely susceptible to this, I think, in some ways. I think the big point is nonprofits are addressing, hard problems, urgent problems that are facing people, and everything feels important because of that. All of your work feels like it is super important. We have to get this done. We have to do it well, and we have to do it fast. And then I think there are kind of some secondary pressures too. I think a lot of nonprofits are competing for funding, and oftentimes a way to compete for funding is to promise more with less resources, less time, less money, whatever. And I think that can put on some unique pressures onto staff. And I think the big point I would make there is I think there are times when urgency can breed innovation and you want to solve that problem quickly. But I think there are also times when you kind of throw innovation out the window in favor of what can I do right now to get through the day, get through the week, and then you're not really thinking about, what happens when I'm in this exact same situation in 3 months, in 4 months. So I think one of the things that I would recommend nonprofits do in all situations, not just hiring, but kind of in general, is find some time, every couple of months to block off the day, block off a couple of days, and really think through what you've accomplished, how you're accomplishing it, and where those pain points are, and find some time to almost intentionally slow down, right? I think it's great to be urgent, and I think it's important to be urgent when tackling those kinds of problems. But I think you can also kind of help guard against that, kind of the negative parts of that, by maybe scheduling that time to just slow down, take some time, schedule a thinking day. It sounds silly, but it can be actually very, very helpful to just spend some time thinking about what your organization is going through, how the work is going, and that sort of thing.
That's amazing, Sterling. And your point about urgency is potentially being a hindrance to innovation really resonated with me. What do you all think is a reasonable amount of time for a candidate to follow up with you after an interview? Let's say you say, we will have a decision for you in 3 weeks, and the candidate follows up 3 days after your interview. Or 3 weeks.
That's too
or
soon.
in 3 weeks.
That's too soon. 3 days. If I say 3 weeks and you're following up 3 days, that's a little too soon. That's fine. I understand you may be very excited about the role, and I think that's it's not going to like, I'm not going to not present you, or all of a sudden you were a great candidate, now you're not. No, it's nothing like that. But I do think there can be a little bit more grace extended. If you're following up with me after 3 days, and I said, I probably won't have anything for you for a couple of weeks, I may be able to respond to that email that day or maybe the next day, but it might fall down the list a little bit too, and to kind of give some understanding to the context, I think.
I'm curious to hear from my illustrious colleagues. If you email a candidate, how much time do you expect to go by before you get a response?
I start to get a little worried if it's more than 36 hours. And it's 36 instead of 24 because it really depends on the time of day. Like if I'm responding to an email in the evening or the afternoon at like 4 p.m. and you don't get back to me until 36 hours later, so midday, 2 days later, that's probably fine. I'm not as worried about that. Anything more than that, I'm starting to wonder a little bit. I don't think it's something horrible. You're not gonna get like a black check mark in the book and never be contacted again if you don't respond sooner. I think we all understand that job searching can be almost a full-time job on top of your full-time job, right? You're busy, you have work to do. It's my 9 to 5 to respond to those emails. It's not yours. I get that. But I think there is some expectation of a relatively quick response, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I feel like if a candidate takes like days between each kind of message, then it just indicates that they're not very interested in a job, which obviously might be a problem down the road. So I think that 36-hour is a good metric.
I think it depends a little bit on the stage of the search as well. If we're in the early part and it's us as talent consultants and associates reaching out about a potential opportunity, I think there's a little bit more leeway in how much time, versus if we're at the end of the search, there's like one finalist, you're it, we're ready to, they want to have one last conversation, and you take 3 or 4 days to respond to schedule that one last conversation. That's a harder sell. It's both on our end, but also to the client. The client's going to look at that, rightly or wrongly, as a lack of interest in the role, and it could hurt your candidacy. Just be completely honest.
If it's a one-time 48-hour delayed response, I'll let that slide. Things happen. I understand. If it's like on multiple occasions, you are taking more than 2 days to respond to an email, especially like when we're in the stage of interviewing with the client, I think that to me is a concern. And also, like you all said, a concern to the client. So it's definitely helpful to be as responsive as quickly as you can, if you are very interested in an opportunity.
There's one aspect of this work that is invisible and most people don't know about, which is energy and momentum. Searches have momentum. And once you start talking to a candidate and they demonstrate interest and they interview and then they interview again, a search can start to pick up momentum. And that does great things, both the candidate and the organization that's doing the hiring. So that's where having an urgent ethos can be really helpful. As a consultant that is helping to move the search along, as a candidate, and as a hiring manager, if folks are scheduling things quickly, responding quickly, then that can help in the decision making and make a real tangible difference in whether a search happens or not. At the same time, one of the real blind spots that we have in nonprofits specifically, but I think this is true throughout, is that the folks that are making decisions for when particular milestones need to be met aren't necessarily the ones doing the work to meet that milestone. So for example, if I say, hey, we have 3 weeks to be able to reach out to 100 people instead of 6 weeks, now all of a sudden, my dear colleague Dave, who's the associate on the search, has half the time to do all the work. And so in an attempt to try to meet the candidates, the client's needs, I've now put my more junior colleague in a worse position. So that's something that us old heads have to try to remember, that if you're in a position to be able to set deadlines for things, and you're not the only one that has to deliver on those deadlines, think about how it impacts other people.
Well, this was fun. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to this conversation. And we hope that there will be many more podcast episodes exploring other topics as it relates to hiring, talent, and nonprofit organizations.